Natural Gas webinar. The aim of this webinar is to raise awareness of the advantages of clean energy and its impact on carbon emissions. The event, which will feature experts from the energy sector, is aimed at specialists in the fields of energy, the environment, the academic sector, and members of the public interested in improving a sustainable environment. This is a webinar organized by Gaia, SPA Lima. This webinar will be in English, but simultaneous translation is available. At the bottom of the panel, you will find the interpretation button. You must activate the Spanish option. For this event, we have invited Alexei Kovshin, an expert and a specialist on the topic that we will address today. He will address the audience for 30 minutes. After this presentation, there will be an important session of specialists. This session will be moderated by Ms. Gabriela Avila, the Tax and Legal Supervisor for KPMG in Peru. Please leave your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom panel, so that we can answer them while the panel is in progress. Let them know that if they have any further questions at the end of this webinar, they should write to us at spegaiaeventosperu@gmail.com. These questions will be then answered by our specialists. We now give the floor to our speaker, Alexei Kovshin. Alexei is Vice President of Van Meers Energy. He's a fiscal policy advisor who helps governments and national oil and gas companies develop fiscal terms and policies to attract investments in exploration and major projects. Alexei also designs policies for governments to address energy transition through gas development, integrated projects, and the financing of downstream infrastructure. Alexei is based in Panama and has extensive experience in the Caribbean and Latin America. Proceed, Mr. Kovshin.
Good morning to everybody. I hope you all see the slides and everything is working. So today I would like to offer you some of my views or our company's views on natural gas in the context of sustainability agenda. First, let's take a look at what role natural gas plays currently in the regional energy mix. The share of fossil fuels is 70% for the region. It's a lot, as you can imagine. Oil accounts for 40%. I apologize, I have some technical issue, but I will fix it right away. Apologize. That should work now. Okay, my apologies. So the oil accounts for a very high percentage, 40%, natural gas is 26%, and the coal that is used for a few countries in the region accounts for 4%. So it is 70% for the region, and it is 82% for the world. So the region is actually ahead of what is happening for the entire world. And the region as a whole has a significantly higher share of renewables, including hydro energy generation. But the region still has a high share of oil, which is 40%. If you look at how each of the energy sources have been changing in the last 5 years, you will see that natural gas has been growing, as well as renewables more than doubled in just 4 years. Of course, what all of us would like to see, both companies and people and governments, is that renewables the bars for renewables would be as high as for oil. It may happen, but unfortunately, this will take decades, and I would like to repeat this again, that decades, not years. We will get there eventually, and gas is actually a resource that can help us in this process. If we look at the country's levels, the share of fossil fuels varies, but for the majority, it is still high. And it is high due to the energy needs and transportation. Many countries also rely on fossil fuels for electricity needs. Not in all countries, but in many, especially most developed ones. At the same time, natural gas is considered by many jurisdictions in the region as a desirable source and also a tool to expand renewable electricity generation in order to back the peak demand when renewables cannot supply in full. If we look at the gas balance for the region as a whole is a net importer of gas. Around 22% of gas demand is a deficit, and it will continue to grow. Only a few jurisdictions are net exporters, such as Bolivia, Peru, and Trinidad and Tobago, by far, which is the largest exporter. And such exports must expand. So the region relies on natural gas. It is a net importer of gas, and demand will continue to grow. Why? To replace oil in power generation, to enable expansion of renewables, but also to supply low emission hydrogen for the industrial use. What about the reserves? And the resource base supports further development and expansion of natural gas. Current production in Colombia, in Bolivia, in Venezuela, and Trinidad and Tobago has been decreasing as there have been no new projects in pipeline. And this decrease is, to some extent, is offset by increase in production in Argentina and Mexico and Brazil. Argentina actually has achieved impressive growth in the recent years and is on the path to soon become an important exporter of gas. The remaining reserves in the region are substantial, and the top holders of gas reserves are, if we do the rating, half of all the remaining reserves are held by Argentina and Venezuela. Almost all of the second half is Brazil and Mexico. Colombia and Bolivia hold significant undeveloped reserves, and the rest of the region is spread and country specific, but accounts for roughly 12%. So there is enough gas to cover domestic demand and future growth, as well as to support expansion of LNG exports. So the other way to look at it is that there is plenty of gas in the region to make good use of it, including fund low emission initiatives. Yet, some countries take different approach how they want to develop their gas and broadly oil and gas reserves. Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil focus on expanding gas production. Colombia, at the same time, will no longer issue new licenses. Ecuador bans certain new developments. However, internationally, there is a broader understanding that the development of at least natural gas should not be limited. Let us look at the state of fiscal policies. A good metric to use in the context of fiscal policies is the level of government take or fiscal take. It demonstrates how much government receives from oil and gas projects. And for investors' government take is the second factor after geology that affects investment decisions. Typically, the higher the quality of reserves, the higher the government take. If we look at the government take level from our database, which is what this heat map demonstrates on the slide, you will see that except for a few countries, the fiscal terms in the region are competitive. So the green color means low level of fiscal payments. The red means high level of fiscal payments, high government take, and the whole world is somewhere in between. If countries keep the government take high, but the quality of reserves, their quality in terms of costs and markets does not justify this, it means that companies will simply invest somewhere. And looking at countries like Bolivia, Ecuador, and Venezuela, indeed the investments in new projects in recent years is very, very limited. Some factors may prevail over fiscal terms. For example, environmental restrictions or difficult permitting. So a country may have attractive geology, may have competitive fiscal terms, but still this does not result in more investments. And Colombia could be considered as an example, whereby on this heat map, the fiscal terms are competitive, the reserves are there, but investments are still limited. But as far as fiscal policies are concerned, keeping the fiscal terms competitive is very important for countries if they want to continue attracting investments. Upstream gas investments are very risky, and the investment cycle is very long. In the context of energy transition, the fiscal term should be able to adjust what may happen in the markets in the next 10, 15 years. So what I have on this next slide is I demonstrate the stress test of the existing fiscal terms. So long-term oil and gas prices will decrease with the expansion of renewables, with the replacement of oil and the feedstocks. But also on the cost side, projects' costs will be increasing. With the deployment of carbon capture, with additional investments, mandatory requirements to control fugitive emissions from Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but also introduction of strong carbon pricing, which will increase costs for oil and gas projects. So if this all happens, how all the fiscal terms that are applied today by countries, what would happen with the economics of projects? And if you apply this test, you will see that fiscal terms in most countries simply cannot adjust to such conditions and result in uneconomic projects. And this is a signal that these fiscal terms need changes. Yet, some jurisdictions in the region are able to adjust. Most competition, however, will come from North America because their fiscal terms are very competitive and are actually set for the energy transition without any further adjustments. So in order to attract investments in the coming years with a 20-25 year horizon, some countries need to adjust their fiscal terms now. And this means restructuring royalty formulas, restructuring R factors that are very common these days, including in the region, including introducing decarbonization cost allowances for tax calculations, and introduce efficient price-based calculations for royalties and taxes so that the fiscal terms can efficiently adjust to changes in the market conditions. Now, I would like to briefly touch on some of the low emission policies and as they relate to natural gas. All of these factors, such as carbon pricing, carbon capture, low emission, hydrogen, and biogas, they both positively and negatively impact natural gas, creating an interesting interdependence. So, for example, carbon pricing will first promote natural gas as the fuel of preference compared to natural gas and coal. So it will help natural gas, but at the same time, it will promote green hydrogen to gradually replace gas for all of its application. So this is an interesting interdependence, and let's take a look at what is the state of some of the key policies in the region compared to what is happening internationally. Let's start with carbon pricing, which by far is the most important policy a government can implement in the context of energy transition. And unfortunately, this is the area where the region is behind. Carbon pricing may take two forms. First is carbon tax, or it could be called something else, but conceptually it is a carbon tax, with its specific ways, how it's calculated, to whom it applies, to whom it does not apply. So carbon tax is the first form, and the second form is emission trading systems or schemes. ETS may be cap and trade system, like the European Union has, or it could be baseline and credit system, such as Canada and Australia. The main difference between these two systems, the carbon tax and ETS, is that carbon tax is a much weaker mechanism to achieve change. It has very little coverage of emissions. The governments cannot set the price too high because it's mostly levied on individual end users and acts like an excise tax on consumption. So most of the industrial emissions are not captured with carbon tax. And many countries have come to realize that and understand that ETS is a much stronger instrument and slowly transitioning towards ETS system. Let's take a look at the state of carbon markets in the world and in the region. And if you look at the map, it may seem that actually only a small portion of countries have carbon markets or carbon pricing, and that is not true. Yes, there are so many blind spots on the map, but in terms of the world's GDP, the most of the GDP is covered, with the only exception of the United States. Majority of GDP is already covered by some form of carbon pricing. In the region, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Mexico, and Uruguay have implemented carbon pricing, but in the form of carbon tax. And some countries like Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico already have special provisions for natural gas to give it an advantage, to have a clear signal that natural gas is welcome and we want to promote it, unlike other fossil fuels. Brazil, Chile, Colombia are considering ETS systems with crediting as a more efficient carbon pricing tool. And Colombia and Chile also permit crediting against carbon tax. Crediting whereby you can do something to reduce your carbon pricing obligations is a very important aspect of carbon pricing because it creates demand for emission reduction projects, which can be leveraged by emitters. And we're talking about high quality credits, technology-based reductions, not the voluntary forestry projects which have very poor reputation. So this is the direction where the world is moving, and we also see some developments in the region. But the state of carbon markets in the region is that carbon pricing policies are weak for a number of reasons. First is only few jurisdictions have implemented carbon pricing. Those that do have it in the form of carbon tax, not ETS, and the level of carbon tax is very low to stimulate change. And this is why carbon tax is not a proper tool, and it should be replaced by ETS, or otherwise countries can have both, which is the case in many jurisdictions in the world. You have both the carbon tax, which serves its purpose, but the main instrument to reduce emissions, to restructure the way the energy metrics may be changing, is ETS. And there is still a lot of work that needs to be done on that front in the region. And carbon pricing is the fundamental policy that should start all of the efforts, or let's say all other efforts should stem from the carbon pricing. Let's now talk about carbon capture. And carbon capture is a very important element in sustainable energy development. Some argue that it is just an excuse to pollute, but this is not the argument accepted by most governments. So carbon capture has, it is a viable solution to expand natural gas projects by much cleaner use of gas generation. Literally, you emit no carbon dioxide if you control other emissions in the value chain. It creates opportunities to produce low emission hydrogen, which is still more economic to produce than green hydrogen. And hydrogen in the region is in high demand for the industry, especially in the most developed jurisdictions. Also, carbon capture could be used for production of synthetic fuels and feedstocks in the future. There is no need for that now, or rather no demand. There is always a need for it. We want it to grow, but change in the future. Carbon capture is gaining big momentum internationally. Europe sees carbon capture as a very important element of its energy transition, but the approach that they have is simply mandatory use of carbon capture, so just I call a stick approach, no carrot. But there is some funding to implement this project, and again, the funding comes from carbon pricing. So that is another use of these funds. The US and Canada have very strong tax incentives to implement this technology, not just for oil and gas, but oil and gas companies are certainly early adopters of this technology. So US and Canada have incentives, including in bioenergy carbon capture, for which there are very high hopes for this technology, and direct air capture, which is by far the most expensive of all. Indonesia and Malaysia are established oil and gas and mostly gas producers, and they have special provisions for upstream to help implementation of carbon capture for oil and gas as soon as possible, including for carbon capture as a service, which is an interesting concept. And Australia, Alberta, they have very strong provisions for crediting against their ETS system, which is the direction where all jurisdictions should be moving as the most effective policy. Carbon storage licensing is also high on agenda, and it is strongly promoted in Europe, in North America, in Australia. But these are jurisdictions that already have established regulatory framework. So it would be great to see this in the region, but first it has to, it is just one component of the broader carbon capture policies and framework. So if there is no captured carbon, then there is no use for storage. So the region lacks a little bit, and I will talk about this in a moment. Actually, let's do it now. So what happens in the region on the front of carbon capture? Colombia has already some tax incentives, but again, this is it is fantastic to have a tax incentive, but the effect would be much stronger if the demand for these projects would come from carbon pricing signals. And the countries where we see most interest in carbon capture is where the demand is driven by carbon pricing. The only exception is the US. It is the only jurisdiction that does not have a federal carbon pricing, and they're doing slightly differently. However, I believe no other country can afford that level of investment. So it would rather come from carbon pricing rather than tax incentives. And on top of that, regulative framework and carbon pricing signals are required if, of course, you would like to make it possible. You have to have regulations how these projects are handled, how the infrastructure, what are the requirements for the transportation infrastructure and the storage requirement and so forth. And this takes a lot of technical regulations, which we don't see in the region. Petrobras has scalable projects, and they're actually the main promoters to introduce framework in Brazil, which is currently under consideration. Let's now talk about hydrogen, and hydrogen will impact oil and gas more than any other energy transition developments. Hydrogen is what you may call a Swiss knife of energy transition. Hydrogen can be blended with gas easily, up to 20–30%. It can be made, it can be used to make synthetic fuels, synthetic feedstocks, and so on. Even if the world turns completely renewable tomorrow, we still need feedstocks, and it doesn't have to come from oil and gas. It could be produced from hydrogen. Today, most of hydrogen is consumed by industries and is produced from natural gas. And it could be produced in a very clean way with combination of carbon capture. Green hydrogen is the one that is produced from water with renewable electricity. Both green hydrogen and low emission hydrogen will be part of the hydrogen economy. So some countries in the region have already pioneered green hydrogen projects. Argentina and Chile. Peru has a lot of experience in hydrogen production and trying to reduce the intensity of its hydrogen project. This is all very nice and fits in the whole idea of promoting hydrogen. Prospects for green hydrogen are very dependable on geography. So what you have in terms of wind and solar, and this is, I have an extract from the IEA that in some parts you can indeed produce green hydrogen very, very cheaply. You need it to stay below $2 per kilogram to make it competitive with gas-based hydrogen, but also opportunities for the region to produce clean, low-emission hydrogen from gas are also very high. But similar to carbon capture, the regulatory framework is required. Most countries have beautiful strategies and draft frameworks that picture wonderful roadmaps, how they can achieve what they want to achieve. And it's very important to have strategies and frameworks, but actual laws and actual technical regulations are required. And we see that a lot of countries are progressing faster than countries in the region, but there is no question that that will change, and we'll see more regulations in the next 5 years for the region. Also, there's some tax incentives that are being considered. So Colombia has tax incentives and general framework as one of the only countries that have it for now in the region. Argentina already have the framework, but they're revising it in the context of all the recent developments. And they're also considering tax incentives. Brazil also considering draft legislation and framework, including mandatory blending of hydrogen into the gas system. And this gas could come both from low emission hydrogen and green hydrogen. So this is something that will both disrupt natural gas, but also will help natural gas. And this is the area where both sources can coexist. But again, a stronger carbon pricing signals are required for low carbon hydrogen investments. Before we wrap up, I would like to say a few words about ESG framework and environmental, social, and governance mandatory disclosures in the context of today's discussions. We're obviously only interested in the environmental and emission element of it. But ESG requirements itself, of course, will not change the market. They will not reduce emissions or stop using coal in the world. But the way I like to think about ESG regulations, mandatory regulations, is that they force companies and governments to think about the problem in a structured way. It helps to create and keep inventory of the issues that help you achieve changes. So mandatory ESG framework need to be introduced in the region. It is a small but impactful step. And we see this being implemented more actively internationally. Voluntary efforts by some companies is a bonus, but the mandatory framework should be implemented more actively. For now, we see Colombia introduced it for traded entities, but this is something that should be implemented more actively in the rest of the regions. And to conclude, the natural gas has an important role and will continue to stay relevant. I keep the metrics, the current metrics, because these are numbers that are hard to run away from. Fiscal and environmental policy needs to support domestic gas production. Carbon pricing policies must be established in a way that does promote change, not just for the fact to say that we do have carbon pricing. And regulatory framework for low emission require legislative implementation and should work together with effective carbon pricing policies. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to our panel discussion.
Thank you very much for your important participation, Mr. Alexei Kovshin. We now continue with the panel, where we will be also assisted by Mr. Kovshin. Here are our speakers: Enoch Basilio. Enoch Basilio is a PhD candidate in carbon sequestration at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia. He's currently working on the understanding and enhancement of carbon sequestration mechanisms through experimental work and numerical simulation. Enoch holds a bachelor's degree from the Universidad Nacional de Ingeniería in Peru, as well as a master's degree in engineering from the University of Alberta in Canada. Enoch Basilio has extensive experience in multi-phase flow in porous media, focuses on the flow of gas in underground formations. We are also joined this morning by Mrs. Beatriz de la Vega. Beatriz de la Vega, a lawyer from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, has more than 24 years experience as a legal and tax advisor to companies in the energy and natural resources sectors, and as a consultant on energy transition issues to government entities and associations. She has completed postgraduate studies in energy law and taxation, the environment, and natural resources at the University of Houston in Texas, the USA, and hydrocarbons law at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, the United Kingdom. Beatriz is a professor in the energy law course at ESAN and in mining and hydrocarbons taxation at the PUCP, the University of Lima, and the finance program at ESAN. She is a member of a number of associations with ties to the mining and energy sector, such as the Society of Petroleum Engineers, SPE, Women in Energy, WIN, the International Association of Energy Negotiators, and of tax institutions such as the International Fiscal Association. The moderator for this important panel will be Ms. Gabriela Avila. Gabriela has more than 7 years' experience in the area of taxation. The focus of her experience has been on the provision of consultancy services to local and overseas companies on the application of local taxes, double taxation agreements, tax planning, and support in tax inspections. Her practice has focused on sectors such as mining, oil and gas, electricity, air transportation, foreign trade, telecommunications, and digital services, among others. Gabriela has also participated in the implementation of NDC in Peru in accordance with the Paris Agreement for Energy Transition Projects. She has collaborated with private and public entities as well as with bodies for international cooperation in the design of regulatory frameworks to promote a fair energy transition.
Camila, for the introduction. I would like to start greeting everyone and thanking Peru Energía and SPE again for providing us with this space to talk about the situation of natural gas and sustainability in the region. Likewise, I would also like to thank the panelists for their participation and willingness to share their reflections and perspective on the present and future of the sector. Especially to Alexei for having summarized in his presentation many relevant topics and interesting starting points for the conversation we're going to have next. In this sense, I would like to start by asking Alexei and Beatriz, which do you think are the main challenges that the gas or oil and gas sector in Latam companies face in this new energy transition context? Especially now that many factors such as the climate crisis, customer demand, government actions, and other factors are driving the new energy transition away from fossil fuels toward renewable and decarbonized alternatives. And maybe we can start with Alexei and continue with Feinaf and Beatriz.
The main challenges that we see is that some of the sweet spots where companies may develop resource in the region, the geology is attractive. The fiscal terms in some countries are very competitive, investor friendly, but obviously companies face some uncertainty around other policies as environmental and permitting. Not everywhere, it is very country specific, but there are some missed opportunities due to that, which may be overcome. There are ways how this remaining reserves still could be developed in sustainable way for the benefit of the host countries and serve the whole region. Also, the new areas where companies may show their expertise, apply their capital and know-how, like hydrogen development and carbon capture. For that to happen, you need to introduce regulations and laws. So this is something that is for governments to catch up a little bit with the industry and how industry wants to proceed with that. So these are some of the ideas that I have in mind, and let's see what other panelists think about it.
Thank you, Alexei.
Well, just to add and not repeat what Alexei was mentioning, I should say also the political stability in the region is another consideration that perhaps is delaying in some spaces the energy transition agenda first as a broad framework. And specifically in the case of natural gas also in line with this, what will be long-term plans for countries? As you know, some countries are with potential reforms, as the case of Brazil, and in other cases, just a passing change of government. This weekend, for example, Argentina changed half results in the elections, and in case of Peru will face elections. So there are, no say more about Mexico also. So, and they are relevant players in the natural gas sector. So I think it's also that will be part of the delay in the agenda, and that also create that there are delay or the investors start looking another or other kind of jurisdiction in which perhaps they can monetize quicker any kind of investment at this moment.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, thank you so much, Beatrice, and thank you so much, Alexei, for such an insightful presentation. There's one word that I think Alexei repeated like a 1,000 times. It was the word regulation, right? So I think, especially in the LATAM region, we are lacking from regulation a lot. So sort of just to complement what the previous panelist has mentioned, I believe that the four main challenges that the LATAM oil and gas companies will face or are facing in this new energy transition is to first adapt to policy changes. Sometimes the ambition of each of countries to try to follow the trend or the global trend towards decarbonization sort of push them to put unrealistic targets. So sort of companies have to face, right? They have to adapt to these very fast policy changes. Also, as Beatrice just mentioned, there are investment shifts. Now investors, and I was just listening a couple of weeks ago to some panelists that were mentioning that we are in an era like we're gonna give from 5 to 10 years for investors to keep investing in oil and gas. Everyone now wants to invest in renewable sources, in something that is more green, right? So also, just a moment, sorry about that. And also, they have to adapt. One of the other challenges is the technological transformation too. So now what companies are doing, they're trying to diversify their portfolios into renewable sources. However, oil and gas companies specifically before didn't have the expertise to invest in renewable sources. Now you see Equinor, you see BP, you see most of these major companies around the globe investing in renewable sources. And last but not least, and I think this is the most important, is the market dynamics. And also, if we, for example, come back to the Latin American region as our focus today, is that let's not forget that this in Peru, at least, there is more than 5-6%, probably it's less, more or less, that are still using they're still using, for example, wood for cooking, right? So they don't have a continuous and clean energy access. So again, if we ask ourselves, okay, we want to transition, but these people that have no access to electricity or to clean energy sources, what are they going to transition from, right? So I think these four main points that I just mentioned, like adapting policy changes, investment shifts, and technological transformation are the main challenges today for the oil and gas companies.
Thank you, Enoch. Very interesting, all the standpoints. But I will also, in this context that presents a lot of challenges for every actor is involved in the sector. In your opinion, what are the next steps that should be taken by the public or private entities in order to guide the sector towards fair energy transition?
Should I continue this or?
Yes, you can start, Enoch. Thank you.
Okay, so probably as again, Alexei was mentioning a few alternatives, right? So one of them, especially talking about, again, natural gas, he was mentioning, for example, if we want to decarbonize. So let me just give a quick introduction about fossil fuels, right? We have coal, which is probably the most polluting fossil fuel we have. Then we have petroleum or oil, right? And then we have natural gas. Natural gas is sort of the cleanest fossil fuel we have available right now. And I was just reading some of the questions before in the chat, and they were mentioning why would natural gas or oil and natural gas will keep relevant in the future. It's because of the energy density they have. It's very difficult to replace such high energy density from fossil fuels with renewables, right? So for example, just to give you an idea, if I want to turn on a LED bulb, for example, just a LED bulb, this one that has like very low consumption. With natural gas, the efficiency is 90%. Then if you move to solar powered electricity, the efficiency is only 30%. So this is the main challenge, replacing fossil fuels with renewables. And so what our companies are doing right now, they are trying to diversify into green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. In my case, if we want to promote especially Latin American community economy, especially, for example, countries like Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Argentina, those who have very large resources in natural gas, they should target blue hydrogen. Why? Because first, it can help dynamize the economy of the country, as they will keep producing natural gas. Plus, they can merge this with carbon sequestration, right? So, and I know there is a lot of concern about carbon sequestration, but nowadays, studies or scientific studies in carbon sequestration have advanced that much that we can talk now about the safe carbon sequestration, talk about mineralization, talk about sequestration in carbon aquifers. So I think companies or countries should go towards these areas.
Very interesting. Thank you, Enoch. Beatrice, Alexei, would you like to add something?
Yes. Another, I think that governments and should analyze in terms of supply and demand. No, Alexei start with a slide in which he was showing what countries in the region are importers and what are exporters. So it means like they will have excedents to create more business in the region. So it's something that geopolitically speaking should be analyzed, and this requires like a push from governments. The same that happened, for example, in the European Union, because when the Ukrainian-Russia conflict started, and there was, of course, some questions about the future of the use of natural gas. In one of the discussions in the European Union, the natural gas ended to be clean energy, or including the taxonomy of clean energy, because of those considerations, because it's need. It's still a need element for energy transition. So the same or in similar consideration, governments have to align this and also create business, because if we see the ratio of poverty in our region still exists, and there are a lot of people that, as Enoch mentioned, still don't have access to energy. So it's something that have to be in first place considered by governments. And also another thing that could be that perhaps we could take advantage is, instead of waiting for what is coming or what the regulation have to change, look what we have. For example, in that case, companies could analyze what the legal or tax environment could provide in order to advance with projects or pilot projects that could be in the future creating a business or enhancing energy transition. And for example, many countries in Latin America, as in other jurisdictions, have incentives for innovation for technology, and also for new energy transition tools. No, for example, there is a tax credit incentives for example, in Colombia, related to CCUS that was mentioned by Alexei and Enoch. And in other countries like Peru, Uruguay, Brazil, there is deductions also for the same considerations. So it's something that should be analyzed, because if we want to create like a reasonable model in which investors will create profitability in doing some projects without expecting any change in legislation, that could be also the way.
Thank you, Beatriz. So, and okay, I don't know, Alex, if you have something else to add.
Oh, yes, I obviously agree with the panelists, and the task to achieve significant change in the energy metrics is a very difficult task. And governments should use all the alleys that they can use to get there. And I believe that oil and gas should not be specifically excluded from the toolbox to achieve there. And it is just that governments should implement practical policies, how they're going to be where they want to be in 15, 20 years. And I see no scenario in which gas can be excluded from it. So we will see more changes, more rethinking of approach in the coming years. But governments should start thinking more structurally about it, and of course keep the practical aspect of it in mind.
Thank you, Alexei.
Nothing can be excluded.
It's true. Thank you, Alexei. So in this context of very opportunities that this new paradigm presents, and for example, with the increase of biofuels, or the increase of the demand of hydrogen, green or blue, in the world, and also as the hydrogen proposed as a new energy vector. What direction do you think that entities can take in terms of the goods or services or other activities that should be prioritized in LATAM?
Maybe I can start, and
Yes.
We see some, at least at some level, not at the government level, some negativity towards oil and gas companies, that they should be excluded from the discussions, and they are the ones who are responsible for the climate crisis that we have. My view on that is oil and gas companies should not be excluded from these discussions. Oil and gas companies are those entities that may actually significantly help us with energy transition. They should stay part of it. It is, first of all, for oil and gas companies, it is the matter of survival. They don't want to go out of business, and they want to change together with the world. Large companies have the know-how and the capital and the ability to manage new complex projects. So if you talk about hydrogen, most of its value chain is similar to gas. Oil and gas companies are best positioned to implement large-scale projects. Biofuels production. Well, how biofuels are really different from diesel and petrol. This is what oil and gas companies have top expertise in and have been doing this for more hundreds of years. So oil and gas companies have a very, very important role to play and help the world to move to through the energy transition. So, and governments again should reflect this in the policies and never exclude anyone or mark anyone who are not welcome.
Just to complement what Alexei was mentioning there regarding hydrogen and biofuels, I need to add again carbon sequestration, which is not exactly reverse engineering from oil and gas production, but oil and gas companies, they have extensive experience retrieving fluids, right, from the underground. So carbon sequestration kind of does the opposite. Now we have the CO2 already captured in the surface, and now we need to insert it underground. So it requires some knowledge, yes, and the oil and gas industry has the necessary knowledge and the tools to do this safely in the future, right? So also just to adapt in a point that you were mentioning, Gabriela, of course we need to care about environmental sustainability, right? This is a must. But I think there are 2 points that we are forgetting, right? From a country point of view, is that a country needs to have energy security, but most importantly, energy equity, right? So is this like these 3 vectors, this triangle that should be in equilibrium? We need to care about the environment for sure, but we also need to care about the security of energy sufficiency in a country and distributing it equally among people. So yeah, that's probably I have to say on this point.
Thank you, Enoch. Beatriz.
Yes, I think in line with what Enoch was mentioning, oil and gas sector is in a different momentum, even though there are constraints like in the world, because there is a real push, even though technically speaking, still it's not possible to be transferred or have like a fast transition to renewables. Yes, there is an adaptation of the oil and gas sector, and also there is an opportunity for the sector. First of all, because the resources are there. Second, the capital sensitivity, because we are talking about companies in the region that are already there, some of them, and they are looking the region as a unique territory sometimes. So the other is to complement that with the ESG standards. For example, Alexei put on the table or show that in the case of Brazil, 2026, there will be developments there with sustainability reports that will be enforced. But don't forget also that starting the next year, 2024, the S1 and S2, the sustainability financial standard, will be in place, first of all in Europe. And that will be an impact in the region too, because no matter what, companies that are in the region will have to start thinking in projects to reduce CO2. And in the case of companies that are related to the oil and gas sector, they are already doing that, projects to reduce CO2, because that is created a good momentum to capture funds from the financial sector. So this is a different way to make business without counting that, as Enoch was mentioning, many of the mayors are transforming themselves as a providers of technology in order to capture CO2 of other sectors or companies or industries that are also creating CO2 to the environment. So the dynamics of the market are changing, and I think that is also a time to see the opportunities around that could create, in this context of lack of capitals from abroad, to try to look for the opportunity, locally in each jurisdiction in Latin America.
Thank you, Beatriz. And finally, I have this question. We talk about the lack of regulations in Latin America, specifically for new technologies and challenges that arise from this new context. And in this sense, I will like to ask you, what do you think is the path that governments in developing countries such as Peru should take regarding the fiscal policy applied to oil and gas sector? I mean, in this case, for example, just putting an idea, do we, for example, need more regulation or benefits or stimulations? For example, in the case of carbon capture, you were talking, which are the gaps that need to be closed in order to advance in the massification or implementation of new projects in Latam? Maybe we can start with you, Enoch.
Okay.
We were talking about carbon capture.
Sure. Of course, governments should have, again, a balanced approach, especially developing countries. We don't have the privilege to say, okay, let's stop oil and gas production by tomorrow, right? So again, we need the income from the oil and gas industry. So I think a balanced approach, mixing, as Alexei was mentioning, and also as Beatriz was mentioning, we need steel from the oil and gas industry as we construct, as we build our transition towards a more green, if you want to call it like this, energy mix. So of course, we need to follow this trend in decarbonization, but also, and I will keep repeating this many times, we need to provide people with a continuous energy source, right? Also, one second recommendation for governments would be to start attracting sustainable investments. So the same way, for example, Peru Petro, right? They do some geology for promoting or exploration in oil and gas fields to produce oil or gas. I strongly believe that the same way should be done to search for saline aquifers, for example, places where we can sequester carbon dioxide, right? So I know right now, CO2 is not a commodity per se, but I'm quite sure in a few years, CO2 will start being a commodity, will start being there's going to be a fixed price on CO2 to sequester per million ton, right? So we don't want to be late when this comes to the market. So why not Peru Petro, for example, starts investing, identifying possible structures in the north of Peru, for example, or saline aquifers suitable for carbon sequestration. So again, we need for sure a legislation, but we also need technicality, right? I think both should be in synergy.
Yes, definitely.
Maybe I can add to that for the carbon capture, and I absolutely agree that more regulations are needed in a good way, and not bureaucracy, but technical regulations. Mm-hmm. And yes, what we see happening in the region is that CO2 is not a concept of a commodity, and fundamental policy that will make CO2 a commodity is efficient carbon pricing. So that will automatically create demand for this project. Oil and gas companies are well positioned and experienced to deliver this project, but to set up this market, carbon pricing is the first probably point to start, combined with incentives and whatever the governments would like to implement to complement the carbon pricing approach. So this is very important for the whole region. Also, in terms of other policies for oil and gas companies, there is some social demand to slow down new developments. And it's okay with oil, but still the region needs to develop new gas projects. Mm-hmm. However, for existing projects, you can always do more with what you have. You can increase the production, you make it increase the recovery factors. And this is the approach that we see in some parts of the world, that governments are saying, okay, we're slowing down new licenses, but we want to produce more gas and more oil from existing fields. And it is technically possible, but it requires rethinking the fiscal terms. In a lot of countries, fiscal terms are not suited for enhanced gas recoveries, enhanced oil recoveries. So this is the area where the whole region can obviously do more, while keeping the promise in some countries to the public that new developments of oil and gas will be slowed down. So these are some thoughts on this topic.
Thank you, Alexei. And Beatrice, you want to add something?
Yes, I will add. So first all, saying as having a legal background, that yes, if you see the composition in Latin America countries, we come from like what is called civil law, no? In which we need regulations, written regulations. So different than like a US or UK that have that the law is constructed in the time, no, under the common law. So it makes like first all something that we lack as a region is to have a comprehensive energy transition, like a pathway. Some countries have, like for example, Chile, or before elections in Colombia, they include that. So, and with long term, no? Like in the case of Chile, with a vision to 2050. So, for example, if we talk about my home country, we don't have yet in the case of Peru. Recently, there is a report that was issued by the International Energy Agency regarding Latin America, energy transition in Latin America, and you will see that. And I agree with what Alexei and Enoch was saying, in the terms that we need to review or include in here the clear view what we want to promote. And also something that I like to, not to compare, but perhaps bring to the discussion is the case of the Inflation Reduction Act in US, because it has three things that they have many things, but three things that, of course, could be analyzed in the case of Latin American countries. And one of them was mentioned by Enoch, which is in parallel to incorporating laws that will incentivize this new business related to energy transition related to gas. Also, you need people, not trained people, and to do that, you need to promote that with something too. Because there is a lot of people that maybe will be transited from oil or from carbon included, not necessarily in the region, of course, but that will be needed in this transition. People with, as Enoch was saying, with technical expertise. But also at the same time to consider how to reduce poverty. How to reduce people that don't have access to energy and are using coal, burning coal to wood, to continue living. So, and most of them women that ended with some disease like lung diseases for that reason. Not only in Peru, but also in other parts of the Amazon area. So we have the opportunity to incorporate legislation that are comprehensive, these other aspects in this energy transition path that we are today. No? So that is something that we need to do first, and not all the countries in the region are aligned with that. So that is important, because otherwise, every 4 or 5 years that are elections in our countries, the agendas are different, and who starts something doesn't continue that. No? And I think now is an urgency, because we are really living in a moment that the climate is changing, and a lot of things are happening related to that. So this could be a priority in the agendas. What is doing the private sector? The private sector and related to oil and gas are doing a lot, but sometimes also it needs to consider how to spend the money in the most efficient way. So for that reason, regulations are needed too.
Thank you, Beatriz. Thank you, Alexi, and very interesting reflections regarding the natural gas sector. And I really appreciate all your answers, and I think we have a starting point to plan the path of the sector in this new context of energy transition. Finally, we have some questions from our participants, and I would like to take these last minutes we have to read you the questions and know your opinions regarding these queries. First one is in Rudy Guerrero is asking us, gas against wind, solar, and other energy sources. Would you please explain the difference in price and capacity inventories and explain why gas or oil will be the most important source of energy in the near future?
Yes, maybe I can start with this. Of course, today the cost of renewable electricity from wind and solar is already more competitive than electricity that you can produce from gas and from oil. The problem is we don't have efficient energy storage to use renewable electricity. And first of all, the installed capacity is not sufficient to cover the regional needs. It has to grow, but as it grows, we're still bumping into the lack of efficient energy storage. So natural gas naturally has to come in to back the expansion of renewables. So to answer your question, solar and wind are cheaper than gas, but we cannot use it to supply the peak demand. And it will take a long time until we have utility scale energy storage. So for now, we still have to rely on gas and oil for at least electricity, but also for the industrial use. Renewables just do not cover all of the needs. So especially the cleaner use of natural gas with carbon capture and combination and development of hydrogen, whether blue hydrogen or low emission hydrogen, as some countries like to call it now, and green hydrogen is the way to actually help the expansion of renewables, which are itself already economic and cheaper, but that is not enough for them to play a bigger role in our today's lives.
Thank you, Lexi. We have another question from another participant, Carlos Roque. He's sorry, the question started in Spanish. I'm going to translate it simultaneously while I'm reading. He's asking us till when companies should continue to invest in oil and gas pipelines and infrastructures. And the participant is asking that if it is well known that we are facing an energy transition and it's concerning, and he's concerned by the delay in constructing these mega infrastructures that are needed for this transition.
Yes, I would like to talk about that. This is the case of Peru, and yes, in the case of we have natural gas resources, and we are not taking advantage of that in in the total capacity at the point of part of the natural gas is used to create energy, but there is a other part that is rejected rejected because it's not possible to economically create a demand for that, because as is mentioned in the question, it's necessary to have infrastructure. But of course, to have that infrastructure, there have to be a plan, a plan, because the construction of this gas pipeline means that there will be other actors, producers, that will inject that gas there to be used in some new business. So in the case, for example, of Peru, Peru has the aspiration, no aspiration is like an old plan to massify the use of natural gas locally. But unfortunately, that is not applied consistently so far. So for that reason, also in parallel is delayed this kind of infrastructure. So because of course nobody will invest in that if it's not secure that will be used and will have the return in the short, medium, and long term. So that is happening. There is not still a comprehensive plan and how will the project finally will be structured. And it's something that could delay momentum for us. No? And once again, we are exporters also to natural gas. So we have to gas to export and also gas to cover our internal demand if it's needed. So if we don't have infrastructure, basically we are leaving that to the, how to say, to others, to others that will take the opportunity maybe in the region and we will end it for real someday importing from other countries natural gas, when today we have the momentum to do new business, not to create, of course, some income, some revenue for us. So yes, that is the situation, and still is something that is in the plans, is showing up in all the plans, strategic plans of the country, but not analyzed in detail yet to, of course, make a serious tender for potential investors.
Thank you, Beatriz. We have another question, but it's in Spanish and it's a bit long, so I don't know if it's okay if I can read it in Spanish. With Beatriz and Alexi, is it okay if I read it in Spanish?
I think it's okay. Are you referring to the last question?
Yes,
Okay.
the one regarding the
You can just read it in Spanish. I can just sort of translate it to English.
Of course. Considero que el uso
So I consider that the use of natural gas is a transition agent, but thought to develop infrastructure for gas combustion. However, not to keep prolonged use of natural gas, but to develop technology for biogas. Because the first motivation is the reduction of greenhouse gas production, but natural gas production liberates amounts of methane to the atmosphere, and it reduces emissions tank to wheel, but the previous consideration cancels all this. So can anybody comment about their experience on this?
I think, I mean, just to paraphrase the question, is that we understand that natural gas is a transition energy, yes, for sure. However, the audience, he disagrees to burn basically natural gas, especially to produce it. So he's right. Natural gas production emits a lot, certain amounts of methane. However, nowadays, with the existing technology nowadays, there's a lot of sensors, even to a satellite level, that can detect CH4 or methane leakage from the pipelines. And I agree. Even though these emissions in the past were much higher, nowadays companies are also investing to reduce their methane emissions. So, and we know that the main motivation, of course, is to reduce the greenhouse gases, for sure. However, I would also ask, the name is not there, right? whenever we talk about, for example, renewables, especially like solar panels, I would just like to ask which energy source is being used to produce this massive amount of panels or like wind generators? Are we using also fossil fuels to sort of produce a more greener energy source? So I think whenever we want to look at the big picture, we should sort of do a life cycle assessment to see if one solution is actually giving us, right, the desired reduction in CO2 emissions. But as a whole, from the very production, like even the mineral production, because for solar panels, we use a lot of minerals, right? So we do a lot of mining there. Are we doing a life cycle assessment to really capture how much of CO2 emissions we have there? So again, I think we should look more into what is more efficient, what is available for each country, and move from there. Learn from the industry and move from one point to another, step by step, without just jumping because, okay, we need to reduce emissions by tomorrow, so we need to transition now to wind generation and to solar generation. I don't think this is the path. I think we should take advantage first of our resources, and with our resources, then we, as Beatriz was mentioning, we should set a very highly technical plan ahead, right? So yeah, I think this is what I have to comment for the last question, Gabriela.
I would like to add a little bit to Enoch's comment that yes, the value chain for gas needs to become cleaner, which means reducing scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, carbon dioxide and methane. And we see internationally that governments are more and more concerned about that. And the policy instrument to achieve that is, again, emission targets through ETS and permit crediting. And this is something that a number of jurisdictions are already considering, that reduction of fugitive emissions from gas value chain as offsetting projects within the ETS systems. So this is still something that needs to be implemented in the region, but I have no doubt that it will be, because this is where the world is rapidly moving, which would only serve to the benefit of natural gas projects. It will make them a little bit more expensive, but in the long term, the gas development will only become more sustainable and will play a more significant role in our metrics, energy metrics.
Thank you, Alexei. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Some participants are interested. Excuse me, I can see the name. Her name is Jenny, I think. The name is not complete in the application. Jenny is asking if you have some information regarding the potential of the blue hydrogen in Peru, or maybe also we can talk in Latam, which is also part of the focus of this talk.
I think I will just comment briefly and let others to add. Peru is a perfect case to test blue hydrogen projects. You already have a very large hydrogen production facility, and you can do it. The operator wants to turn it more into a hybrid with renewable electricity. But of course, the deployment of carbon capture would make this hydrogen low emission hydrogen, blue hydrogen. And this is a perfect pilot for Peru, and an example for the broader region, of course. So the blue hydrogen for sure will have a role in the hydrogen markets in the world, including in the region, and it needs to be promoted.
Just to add up to what Alexei was mentioning right before also his presentation, is that for us, in order to call this blue hydrogen, we need to couple this with some sort of carbon capture and sequestration, right? So I strongly agree with Alex saying that Peru would be a perfect pilot, if we want to call it like this, for a project like this. Would be great to see Peru at least sequestering some. Again, this is what I always say, right? So we probably are not an oil producer country. Like most of the wells we were drilling, like we call them dry. But now, just looking, in perspective, it's like, okay, but they are not dry. They are structures that are ready, that we believed contained hydrocarbons at the beginning. But then when we drilled, it was full of brine. Okay, while now exploring the possibility, of course, we need to do some assessment to store some carbon there, some CO2 there. Again, I think the room for improvement is huge. The lessons to be learned are massive. And we have natural gas, we have structures where we can capture or sequester the CO2. Yeah, so I think the potential, as the question was mentioning, I think the potential is huge.
And I should add that, the projections or the recent studies indicate that in Latin America, the future will be in green hydrogen. So like 60% or above will be green. But agree with Alexi and note that in the case of Peru, there is a potential specifically for blue hydrogen. Unfortunately, just to say, based on public information, the only bill of law that is pending of review under the Commission of Energy is related to green energy, green hydrogen, sorry. And but it has, of course, some constraints, because in this specific case, there is also a pending approval in the Congress regarding another bill of law that is related to massify the investment in renewables. So because now there is limitations for renewables accessing to the interconnected electric system. So if that happens, so I mean, if there is approved these renewable regulations, it could massify the investment in renewables. And at the same time, it will make sense to promote also green hydrogen. That is also a potential discussion in the near future in the Congress. But of course, we also have a potential in natural gas, and we have official plans in regulations that exist, in which the focus of the government is to promote the local use of natural gas too. So that is the situation, and this has to be aligned with our energy transition plans that, of course, are pending also.
Thank you, Beatriz. I think we ran out of time, and I want to thank you all, the panelists and participants, for their time, their questions, and the answers. And now I pass to the organizers.
Thank you very much, both to Gabriela and to all of the professionals who have participated in the Sustainability and Natural Gas webinar today. We would also like to thank our media partners for broadcasting the webinar: the El Gas Noticias Magazine, the Energía Andina Magazine, Perú Renovable, the SPE Student Chapter, and the Universidad Nacional de Ingeniería. We would also like to thank our strategic ally, the magazine Energiminas, the official media outlet for this event. On behalf of Gaia, Capítulo Sostenible de la SPE Lima, we wish to thank you for your participation. If you have any queries and/or questions, send them to spegaiaeventosperu@gmail.com. A very good morning to everyone. We will meet again on another occasion.